sought blessings from Gurudev, and Gurudev or Rabindranath Tagore in turn saw Gandhi as a unifying force in times of turmoil. But the fundamental ideology that unified them was the idea of Swaraj, and it's time we unpack and unravel not just Swaraj, but the persona that the Mahatma and Gurudev themselves were. अब आप मुझसे पूछेंगे, what's a good point to start this conversation, right? Well, I'll tell you honestly, perhaps the best starting point is where we now meet our first guest. I'm told his first love is academics, and I'm also told that he has been instrumental in setting up a wide spectrum of change-based higher education initiatives. And when I say change-based, you can think on the lines of a management program for career-oriented women, an entrepreneurship fellowship in the Himalayan region, a solution-focused design education for the built environment. I think you get the drift. But most of all, he is a pioneering force in Indian higher education. He is the founding dean and a member of the executive board of ISB and the founder and chairman of the board of trustees of the acclaimed Ashoka University. And I must add to that, he is the founder and chairman of Harappa, which is now Upgrad, which strives to become India's largest online institution. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up for our speaker, Pramath Raj Sinha, founder and chairman of Harappa, now Upgrad. So, I can't make do with this kind of applause. We need to go louder than that, please. And we need to really reach the definition of loud. Thank you so much, sir, and a warm welcome to you. And our next distinguished speaker is quite well known for the 5 books that he has authored on the revolt of 1857, of which the most notable is Awadh and Revolt, a study of popular resistance. Now we know very well, we have fondly read and admired his last 3 books as well, Nehru and Bose, Parallel Lives, Twilight Falls on Liberalism, and Nehru, A Short Introduction. And we absolutely, absolutely love walking together with his most recent book, Tagore and Gandhi, Walking Alone, Walking Together. Armed with an MA in History from Jawaharlal University and Nehru University, Delhi, he went up as an Inlac Scholar to St. Edmund Hall, Oxford, and was awarded a DPhil in Modern History by the University of Oxford. And we also know him as the editor, editorial pages, The Telegraph. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the founding Vice Chancellor, Chancellor and Professor of History at Ashoka University, Rudrangshu Mukherjee. Warm welcome to you, sir, and thank you so much for being here this morning. Well, I leave the dais to you, all yours, and I'll take an exit.
Thank you so much, Niharika. This is a bit of a personal and professional moment for me because Rudrangshu and I go back 20 years, and while we've discussed his books, I've never really had the chance to actually have a conversation with him or host him in a conversation like this. So thank you, Rudrangshu, for agreeing to do this. When we were first asked to speak here, I've written a book recently as well, and he has a book as well. And so the challenge was, how do we combine our 2 books and talk about them? This was easy for me because it gave me a chance to say that, listen, I don't need to talk about my book. If you're interested in the book, you can always pick it up. And in fact, Kabir Bedi has already talked about a lot of the aspects that I focus on in my book. So what we'll do is really focus on Rudrangshu's book, which is a very interesting conversation in a way between Tagore and Gandhi, and we'd like to talk to him about that today. So Rudrangshu, I'd like to begin by asking you, you've done a lot of these books of people in pairs. You did Nehru and Bose, and one book that wasn't mentioned, which is the Begum and the Rani. Why did you choose to pick these 2 characters?
Before I get there, Pramod, I must say that one of the 2 persons in this book, Tagore and Gandhi, which we are going to talk about, to take the terms of your book, never studied but learnt. Tagore never went through any formal education. He never went to a school, never went to a college, never went to a
You know, I,
university.
I, I actually noticed that when I was reading the book, I was waiting to learn when did Tagore get educated. And you spend a lot of time talking about Gandhi's education, but you never talked about Tagore's education. And this was one of the questions I wanted to ask you. So he never got formal education.
Never. Never. In fact, whenever he was put into school by his father, he just played truant. He'd leave the house saying that he was going to school and never arrive in school.
Would he be the only ever Nobel Prize winner who never went to school?
Worth looking into. I would think he is. So he didn't study, but he learnt. It's a good example you can add to your book.
Yes, I should in the next edition. Thank you.
No, to come back to the question, I think I always thought that pairing people, apparently contradictory people, and pairing them off is a good way to avoid the conventional forms of writing a biography. You can actually tell your readers about individuals by contrasting them and also seeing how they complemented each other. And that's what drew me to Tagore and Gandhi. There's a lot of complementarity as well as there's a lot of differences as well. And one thing I must confess as a historian is, in a way, this was an easy book to write because they left behind a large volume of correspondence. They did not meet very often because Gandhi, as you know, had wheels on his feet, so he was moving around India all the time. Tagore, on the other hand, did move around, but most of the time he was in the university he established in Vishwabharati. So they did not meet very often, but they corresponded a lot. I mean, there must be over 50, 55 letters that they wrote to each other on various different aspects, particularly when they differed. And this is one of the points I wanted to make in the book, that you can actually differ very strongly, very firmly with another person without losing your respect and your esteem for that other person. And the correspondence, the differences between Gandhi and Tagore, as articulated in their correspondence, explicates this, the fact that you can differ without descending into acrimony. And they seriously differed on certain issues.
Yeah, in fact, I was shocked to read some of the language in the letters. I would never think of writing that directly to people today with fear that they might just take me the wrong way. But they were very direct with each other.
Very direct. Yes, very, very direct. Very, very direct. And but they never abused each other, never cut off relationships with each other. In fact, always the terms were full of respect, and in fact, I would say more than respect, endearing.
So we'll come back to this question of what endeared them to each other and where was there a difference. And I think the book does do a great job of contrasting that, like you said. But how were their journeys different in your mind? What I was intrigued to find that you highlight is that they were both born in the 1860s. So that would put them almost 170 years ago. They were about 8 years apart. So in a way, they were born at the same time. But could you talk a little? And they only met in the early part of the 20th century.
1915.
So 1915 is when they met. So Tagore was 50 something by then and Gandhi was 45 by then. Till then, they had only heard of each other. So talk about the journeys a bit and how similar or different were they up till that point.
So as I said, I mean, Tagore never went to a school or university, but very early in his life, his literary and musical talents were pretty obvious. the Tagore Mansion in Calcutta, which has now become a university named after Tagore, was a hub of literary activity. And this particular family, Tagore family, where all of them uh, had some literary or musical talent, particularly musical talent. But Tagore brought all this together. I mean, he had that magic touch. Whatever form or genre of creativity that he engaged in, he excelled in. So by the time he is 19, 20, he is already being acknowledged as uh, Bengal, the literary figure, the most important literary figure who is writing in the Bengali language. And that's the journey he starts, becoming better known, famous as a literary figure, as a writer, singer, composer, which of course climaxes in 1913 when he is the first Asian to get the Nobel Prize.
So he had the Nobel before Gandhi met him.
Yes, he had the Nobel 2 years before Gandhi met him. Now, there's one other aspect of which is vital to Tagore's creativity and to Tagore's view of life and view of history, which I must touch upon, however briefly. Uh, in the 1890s, the Tagores were very large were a very large landholding family. Their wealth came from rent income. And they had landed estates in what is present-day Bangladesh and present-day Orissa. In the 1890s, around 1892 or thereabouts, Tagore's father gave his youngest son, that is Rabindranath Tagore, the responsibility of looking after these landed estates. They were all in very far-flung and often remote areas of present-day Bangladesh, and which, as you know, is crisscrossed with rivers. This is a riverine tract. And Tagore sets out to do this. He took this very seriously. He actually sat down in the estate's office, took lessons on how to keep accounts and so on and so forth, and then he went out into the countryside, most of the time living on a boat on the river Padma or some tributary or distributary of the river Padma. And this is where Tagore, the young Tagore, actually comes close to two things. One is nature, of course. The open sky, the stars, the moonlit nights, the river itself, the noise the river made. That's one. He became, as he said once, I have been through a lot of ups and downs in my life. What saved me was not literature. What saved me was my love for nature. And the second thing, that even though it was from a distance, from a boat, he observed what was going on the banks of the rivers. The daily routine of very poor people who came to have a bath in the river, perform their various rituals, take part in the various festivals and festivities. He thus got to know rural Bengal, the people of rural Bengal, the daily rhythm of life in rural Bengal, and of course, the oppressive conditions in which he lived. And that is, these two became abiding concerns in Tagore's life, and he articulated them in many of his writings. His observations of rural life come out in his short stories, in some of his poems, and of course his love for nature is everywhere. So this is the university that Tagore went to, if you like. And that's the trajectory it took. And observing these rhythms of daily life, he came to a view of India and a view of history where it seems that the activities of kings, princes, emperors were utterly and completely irrelevant. The so-called world of quote-unquote politics was not the stuff of history. What was the stuff of history was how common people lived and how people like Tagore, even though he was a landowner, how they could engage with common people to make their lives better. And he believed that the real freedom of India, or as he said, Swaraj, the real freedom of India would come when these people became free, such people oppressed and exploited, when such people became free. Gandhi, from a completely different route, completely from a different trajectory, arrives at the same conclusion. He's, of course, he never makes a successful career as a lawyer, in spite of his qualifications from uh, the inner temple. He never makes a career, successful career in India. He makes a successful career as a lawyer in South Africa. But he never quite loses his touch with India. He knows what is going on in India, in spite of being deeply immersed in racial discrimination and freedom from racial discrimination in South Africa, racial discrimination against Indians. And Gandhi comes to the same conclusion that if India has to attain Swaraj, and Gandhi made this very clear in a book that he wrote in 1909 called The Hind Swaraj, it would not be enough to free India politically from British rule. It was necessary to free the common people, to recognize the lives, the autonomous lives that common people lived, and the way they had been functioning for years, generations, despite the many oppressions that had been heaped upon them. This is where the two trajectories actually come to converge. Both of them, one from a literary perspective and one from a more political activist perspective, come to the same conclusion about where lies the future of India. If there has to be a new India, it must come from the rural world and not from the urban elite.
What I found interesting, though, Rudrangshu, in the book was that there was a third individual that brought them together. And this didn't happen naturally. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, the third individual there, is a man called Charles Freer Andrews, who in Bengal at least he is very fondly known as Dinobandhu Andrews, the friend of the poor, Dinabandhu Andrews. Andrews came to India as an Anglican priest, and he taught in St. Stephen's College for a while.
In Delhi?
In Delhi, yes. Okay. And then in the search for lack of a better word, educate himself about India, he arrived in Shantiniketan to actually observe for himself the kind of experiment that Rabindranath was carrying out, a new way of imparting education, quite different from, quite apart from the conventional textbook education that schools and colleges imparted then, and I dare say impart even today, to young men and women. Andrews came to see that, and he was completely fascinated and bowled over, both by the experiment and by the personality and the views of Tagore. They became very close. Now, at this point of time, now I'm talking about 1912, 1913, thereabouts, Gopal Krishna Gokhale sends Andrews as an emissary to South Africa to work with Gandhi. By this time, Andrews has given up his priesthood. He has become a lay person. And he goes to South Africa. And this is where Andrews tells Gandhi about what Tagore is doing in Vishwabharati in Shantiniketan, and the views that Tagore upholds, the views that Tagore subscribes, and how they are. Andrews makes it a point to emphasize to Gandhi actually how they are, without having ever met each other or read each other's writings, how they are, their views were converging. This is how Gandhi gets to know about Tagore. And of course, Andrews, when he returns to India, brings to Tagore what Gandhi is doing in South Africa. So then, a very interesting thing happens. In 2014-15, Gandhi decides that he is going to pull up his stumps in South Africa completely and return to India. Now, the problem here, he has a practical problem in his hands. That is, there were a group of children, young boys and girls, who lived in Gandhi's ashram called the Phoenix Farm. And what was going to happen to these kids? Where would they be educated? Somewhat similarly to how they were being educated in Phoenix Farm. Now, Andrews suggested that the best home for these children would be Tagore's Vishwabharati. So, persuaded by Andrews, the children come to Vishwabharati. And in 2015 February, Gandhi visits Vishwabharati to see how his boys and girls had settled down into this new environment. On his first visit, the visit is very short because while he is in Vishwabharati, he gets the news that his mentor in India, Gopal Krishna Gokhale, had passed away. So he has to rush back to Pune. And so he is unable to meet Tagore because Tagore was, for those 2 days, Tagore was away in Calcutta. So he returns in March 2015 for a longer visit. And this is the first meeting between the two individuals. And they spend a lot of time talking about their views and the first glimpse also we have of a very long-lasting difference between the two. But before they met, after Gandhi's first visit, Tagore writes the first of the many letters that they exchanged. And he, of course, says, I'm sorry to have missed you. I hope you'll come back soon, etc., etc., etc. And then the last line of that letter says that the boys are here. I'm very happy to have them. And they make it clear to me that you and I are one in a common sadhana. The word he uses is sadhana. So, a common spiritual journey that both of us have undertaken. Tagore is the first to recognize that there is a convergence happening here. The difference, and Pramod, I'm sorry I'm taking too much time. The difference is Gandhi comes to Shantiniketan. He's there for 7-10 days, and he notices that there is a lot of caste distinction that exists among the students of Vishwabharati. And that these students are fed by cooks and servants who make the food, serve the food, etc. And he's quite open about it. And he tells Tagore, this is not how an ashram should be run. You see your educational institution as an ashram. How can there be caste distinctions between in an ashram? How can there be cooks and servants in an ashram? I think you should do away with all this. Just remove them. And Tagore says, I agree with you, but I don't think caste distinctions or the employment of servants, cooking one's own food, serving one's own food, these can be done through an order, an administrative order. The students themselves must recognize what is their responsibility. Discipline cannot be imposed. Discipline is something that is organic, that should come from within. And this was a lasting difference between the two of them. Gandhi believed in his ashram and in his mass movements that he could impose discipline by issuing instructions. Tagore never believed in that. He had a more profound, deeper sense of discipline, if I might say, an organic sense of discipline. And the most important difference that they had through their lives concerned this.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned that because the book, if some of you have read it or will read it, you find that there's a lot of letters that you've researched and quoted. And I remember that in the very first letter or note that I think Tagore mentions to Andrews that he's not very happy with these kids because they seem very brainwashed. And they don't seem to have an independent view of.
They have been taught to obey.
They've been taught to obey. So they had been trained by Gandhi in South Africa, and I think that very strict discipline that had been imposed was what they were carrying through. And Tagore found that he was actually critical of
Yes.
that. Of course, he never told Gandhi. He very quickly changed his view about those boys. But his first reaction was, hey, these guys have not been educated right.
So, no, it's interesting. Gandhi, as all of you know, had a very loyal, devoted disciple who was actually the daughter of an English admiral. Her real name was Madeline Slade, and she gave up everything, her privileged life in England, and came to live with Gandhi, work with Gandhi in Sabarmati. And Gandhi affectionately named her Mira Behan. So in India, she is known as Mira Behan. Very few people know that she's actually Madeline Slade. Now, so through Gandhi, Mira Behan also got to know Tagore. And in a letter, she asks Tagore, what is the difference between Bapu and you? And very poignantly, Tagore writes back, Mahatma ji, I'm quoting now, Mahatma ji is the prophet of tapasya. I am the poet of Ananda. The prophet of tapasya and the poet of Ananda. Tapasya, as you know, demands rigorous discipline in meditative practices. Ananda is the realm of complete freedom. And Tagore recognized this. He saw that here is a prophet of tapasya, but different from me. The trajectories, again, are different.
In fact, I'm conscious of the time, and if any of you have questions, please get ready to ask them of Rudrangshu. I just want to ask one last question, Rudrangshu, and then I'll open it up to the audience. It was interesting to note that towards the end of his life, Tagore passed away in 1941. And as he is coming to the conclusion that he might not live too long, he's worried about what will happen to Vishwabharati. And he's fundraising for it, and he's trying to make sure that it is in good hands, and he's trying to persuade Gandhi to become a trustee. And Gandhi steadfastly refuses, that he doesn't want to have anything to do with. And this is not the first time they've had these disagreements. You spoke about that in the beginning. They also disagreed about Swadeshi and Swaraj in the early days. So could you talk a little bit about this? Was this ego? Today people would say, oh, these are all personalities and they have their egos. Was it about principles? And again, what then did keep them together? Because actually, if you read your book, there are just so many places where they differ from each other. Yet they keep coming back together and gravitating.
I don't think, so far Vishwabharati is concerned, it's a matter of principle. But Vishwabharati was always short of funds. And the only fundraiser, Vishwabharati did not have a Pramad Sena to raise funds. Vishwabharati, the only person that raised funds for Vishwabharati or was capable of raising funds for Vishwabharati was Tagore himself. And Gandhi recognized that, and there were at least...
In fact, in one letter, and sorry to interrupt you, he was quite harsh, and he said, why are you going around on a begging trip?
Begging bowl.
With a begging bowl.
Yeah. So I was coming to that. At least two occasions when to stop Tagore from going around with what he called a begging bowl, Gandhi intervenes and raises money. One from the Birla family, and the second time I forget from who. He raised money so that Tagore wouldn't have to, at the age of 75 plus, go around India organizing performances, talks, etc., so that money could be raised for Vishwabharati. And so
Yeah,
Gandhi
he was actually raising money from fee income from
Yes.
performances
Performances.
for the university,
Yeah.
which I was amazed to read about.
And so Tagore knows as his life is ebbing that if this dream project of his, Vishwabharati, there were very few things that were as close to his heart as this educational institution. And he wanted the mantle to come to Gandhi. And he tried. But Gandhi refused to be a trustee because Gandhi did not want to get involved in the raising of funds for Vishwabharati. And that's why Gandhi withdrew when the first request came, I think, in 1937, 38. Gandhi said, no, Gurudev, he always called him Gurudev, by the way, I should have mentioned this. He never called him anything else but Gurudev. And he said, Gurudev, sorry, I know you want me to do this, but I really cannot get into fundraising for any institution at the moment. I have too much on my plate. So that falls through. But the last time he visits Shantiniketan, that's 1939, end of 1939, beginning of 1940. Last time he visits it when Tagore is alive. Tagore hands, as he is getting on the train to leave Shantiniketan, Tagore hands him a sealed envelope and says, read it when you have left Shantiniketan. So Gandhi opens that envelope on the train, just as the train is pulling out of the platform. And he finds that Tagore has written, this institution of mine, I'm leaving in your hands. You do what you think is the best for this institution. And Gandhi has to write back. He writes that letter on the train and posts it in Calcutta when he arrives there, that you have given me the most important gift of my life, and I will do whatever I can to keep Vishwabharati afloat. And in 1945, Tagore is dead 4 years. Gandhi returns to Vishwabharati. And in answer to a question, a very direct question, in fact, he's asked, what were your differences with Rabindranath? And in Shantiniketan, on Rabindranath's turf. And Gandhi says, I began with the assumption that Gurudev and I had major and great differences. But then I discovered that we actually have none in 1945. Now, why did he say that? Despite the many articulated differences that they had, I believe, and this is what I argue in the book, that there was a fundamental agreement between the two of them about the nature of human life, about the future of India, and about what constitutes freedom. I think that is very, very important. What constitutes freedom? Swaraj for them, both of them, meant a substantive freedom where every single individual had the right and the ability to regulate and conduct their individual lives free from external institutions. And that is what brought them together. That is what kept them together. When they differed, they walked alone. But they all knew, they both of them knew that the end of their journey was the same.
Thank you, Rudrangshu, which is why the byline of the book says walking alone walking together. We have a time for a few questions, or should we wrap it up? Two questions? Okay. Uh, there's a question from a young lady in the back.
Could she have a mic? Yes, thank you.
And a simple request, your questions need to be absolutely, absolutely crisp, clear and short. It should be a question, no comments or observations, right?
Sir, I'm Arzu from Sacred Soul School. My question was, what are your views in humanist thought by Petrarch? Like, would it have been helped Gandhiji or India some way in Swaraj?
What thought?
Can you repeat that? The beginning was not clear.
What are your views in humanist thoughts by Petrarch? Like, could have it helped Gandhiji or India some way?
By Petrarch?
Yeah, like the humanist thoughts about human.
Oh, humanist thought.
Humanist thought, yes.
Okay. Now, not in the sense of Petrarchian or Renaissance Italy humanism, but both these figures were essentially humanists in the sense that both of them believed that human life and the enrichment, not the material enrichment, but the enrichment of human life was the sole goal of human existence. Gandhi was a humanist, and so was Tagore. I mean, you only have to read their writings to recognize how integral human beings were to their thoughts, their ideas, and their actions. Question there.
I think that's the last one.
Yeah.
Yes.
Sorry. Tagore plays a big role in the psyche of anybody growing up, especially in Bengal. I'm a Bengali more by belonging, not blood, but I grew up in Durgapur. So my question to you is, you now are with Ashoka University. What part of that liberal thinking? I mean, you do not even, I think, learn your Bengali alphabets without a Tagore poem, right? So what part of that liberal thought you think has influenced you in your journey and as an academician and now at Ashoka?
So I was first like to add a qualification. I do not want to confine Tagore as just to a Bengali intellectual milieu. Okay, I know most Bengalis would like to do that, but I wouldn't like to do that. So, what is it that makes Tagore transcend his Bengaliness, if you like, even though most of what he wrote, more than 90% of what he wrote was in Bengali. What makes him transcend that? And that is also related to my answer to the previous question. Because his abiding concern was with humanity, not just with Bengalis. You know, he wrote a line, a devastating line. I'll say it in Bengali and then I'll try and translate it. He says, he's actually lamenting to God. And he says, you have made রেখেছো বাঙালি করে মানুষ করনি. You have made these people into Bengalis, but you haven't made them into human beings. Manush, you haven't made them into human beings. So, this is what attracts me, that Tagore wanted the minds of all human beings to be open. And I think this is absolutely at the heart of the pedagogy that we try and follow at Ashoka University. Let the windows of our house be open and let the winds come in so that we can breathe and enrich our lungs, our intellectual lungs.
Thank you so much. And I would just like to add on to that, we can never discover the ocean for ourselves if we don't have courage to lose sight of the shore. And with that, thank you so much for that lovely, lovely conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, please give it up once more for Pramath Raj Sinha and Rudrangshu Mukherjee. in conversation about Mahatma and Gurudev, on Gandhi and Tagore, their confluence and influence in modern Indian thought. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. A pleasure hearing you. Well, before I move on, I usually refrain from being stern, but at this point, I must be. For there's something rather disturbing that we've discovered. We've discovered a few of